say to the honourable gentleman, I will not tolerate such behaviour.
A secret document just destroyed Britain's opposition party from the inside. Tonight, Westminster is in chaos. 31 members of Parliament have turned against their own leader, not because of scandal, not because of corruption, but because of a single leaked paper that exposed what voters were never supposed to know. This isn't just another political drama. This is the moment that could decide who runs Britain for the next decade. And if you care about where this country is heading, you need to hear what's really happening behind closed doors. Hit subscribe right now because this story is moving fast, and the next 48 hours could change everything. Here's what we know. A 40-page internal document leaked 3 weeks ago. It wasn't official policy. It wasn't even a proposal. It was labelled discussion options only. But what was inside sent shockwaves through the party and terror through battleground constituencies. The document outlined potential future cooperation with Europe, extending fishing rights, aligning food standards, student exchange programmes, a trade dispute panel. On paper, none of this technically reverses Brexit. But to millions of voters who were promised the Brexit debate was over, it looks like betrayal, and those voters are furious. To understand why this exploded so violently, we need to go back 5 years. Back to December 2019, when Labour suffered its worst election defeat in nearly a century. The so-called Red Wall, dozens of working-class constituencies across northern England that had voted Labour for generations, collapsed overnight. Places like Hartlepool, Grimsby, Bishop Auckland, Blythe Valley, towns where grandparents, parents and children had all voted Labour without question. Until they didn't. The reason was simple: Brexit. These communities had voted overwhelmingly to leave the European Union in 2016. They wanted their decision respected, but Labour kept fighting it. Second referendum campaigns, parliamentary blocking tactics, anything to delay or reverse Brexit. Voters felt betrayed, ignored and insulted. So they did something unthinkable. They voted Conservative for the first time in their lives. When the current Labour leader took over in 2020, he knew exactly what he had to do. He stood in front of cameras and made a crystal clear promise. The Brexit wars were over. No more constitutional battles, no more second referendum talk. Labour would accept the result, move on and focus on what voters actually cared about. The cost of living, the NHS jobs, schools, rebuilding trust. For a while, it worked beautifully. Poll numbers climbed steadily. Local election victories started rolling in. Union leaders who had been sceptical began writing cheques again. Political commentators whispered about a Conservative government running out of steam and a Labour landslide waiting to happen. The Red Wall seats that had abandoned Labour started showing signs of coming home. But politics is never static, and inside the party, not everyone was happy with the Brexit compromise. MPs from London, Brighton, Bristol, cities that had voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU, they never truly accepted it. They watched trade barriers pile up. They saw economic growth stagnate. They blamed Brexit for everything. And privately, they started pushing for what they called pragmatic steps to rebuild cooperation with Europe. 6 months ago, the first crack appeared. A speech by the shadow finance chief mentioned mutual recognition of professional qualifications and shared research programmes with EU partners. The language was careful, it didn't say rejoin. But for voters who remembered the leader's promise, it sounded like the first step backward. Then 3 weeks ago, the dam broke. A 40-page internal discussion paper leaked to a national newspaper. According to journalists who reviewed it, the paper wasn't policy. It was described as exploratory thinking, scenario planning for what a future relationship with Europe might look like under a Labour government. But the details were explosive. Extending fishing access rights beyond current deadlines, aligning some food safety and environmental standards, expanding student exchange programmes like Erasmus, creating a special arbitration panel for trade disputes. Again, none of this technically reversed Brexit. Britain wouldn't rejoin the single market or customs union. But to voters in Brexit-supporting constituencies, it felt like Brussels was being invited back through the side door. One MP was confronted outside a town hall by constituents shouting, "You promised no more backroom deals." The clip went viral in hours. A constituency chair resigned, accusing leadership of forgetting who put them back in power. WhatsApp groups lit up with panicked messages. One leaked screenshot read, "We've just gifted our seats to Reform UK." They weren't wrong. Within 24 hours, Reform UK, the small but loud pro-Brexit party, led by Nigel Farage's political heir, held a press conference. Their leader stood in front of cameras and unveiled a slogan that would dominate the news cycle for weeks: Labour's Brussels betrayal. The phrase trended nationally before lunch. Conservative strategists who had been drowning in their own internal chaos over tax policy and leadership questions suddenly had a lifeline. New attack ads flooded swing districts within 48 hours. Labour, you can't trust them on Brexit. Focus groups showed it was working. Voters who had been considering switching back to Labour were suddenly having second thoughts. Then came the second leak. Internal emails revealed informal meetings between shadow ministers and EU officials over the past 6 months. These were routine diplomatic contacts, the kind that happen constantly in politics, but the timing looked absolutely catastrophic. It seemed to confirm every suspicion. Labour was secretly negotiating with Brussels behind voters' backs. A new poll dropped showing Labour losing 8 points in Brexit-supporting seats. Reform UK gained 4. Conservatives held steady. The electoral math was brutal. If Reform UK stood candidates in every red wall seat and peeled off even 15% of the vote, Labour would lose dozens of constituencies, even if they beat the Conservatives. The vote would split and seats would fall. Then Reform UK made it official. They announced Operation Red Wall, pledging to stand candidates in every single Labour-held seat that had voted Leave in 2016. They weren't just talking. Within a week, they'd recruited candidates in 40 constituencies. High-profile business figures started writing cheques. Former Conservative MPs who'd been purged during Brexit battles started making calls. The nightmare scenario was unfolding in real time. Labour wasn't just losing votes to Conservatives. They were bleeding support to Reform UK, splitting the vote and handing seats away. That's when 31 MPs made their move. These weren't the usual rebels, the perennial troublemakers who opposed leadership on principle. These were serious people, union-backed members who depended on working-class votes, former ministers with decades of experience, newly elected MPs from marginal seats who knew their jobs were on the line. They'd watched the polls collapse. They'd heard the fury in their constituencies. And they'd decided enough was enough. They signed a letter demanding 3 things: immediate and urgent clarification of the party's position on Europe, a renewed public commitment to respecting the referendum result, and a promise that any future cooperation with the EU would be transparent, limited, and fully disclosed to voters before any election. Leadership fired back immediately. The leaked paper was just brainstorming, they insisted. Internal discussion, blue sky thinking, not policy, not even close to policy. Critics were panicking unnecessarily and playing directly into Conservative hands. The real enemy was Tory mismanagement, not imaginary threats about Europe. But in politics, perception is reality, and the perception was spreading like wildfire. Labour was backsliding on Brexit. Wednesday evening, Committee Room 14, a wood-panelled room in the heart of Westminster. The same room where leadership battles have been won and lost for generations, where party coups have been launched and crushed, where political careers have ended in a single vote. MPs filed in quietly, avoiding cameras stationed outside. Whips moved through the crowd, counting numbers, making last-minute appeals. One insider described the atmosphere as a funeral for a leader who's still alive. The vote was held. Not a formal leadership challenge, not yet, but a vote of confidence in the current direction. A test of whether the leader still commanded the loyalty of their MPs. The room fell silent as ballot papers were counted. When the result was announced, gasps filled the room. The leader survived, but barely. A slim majority of just 7 votes. In normal times, a win is a win. But in politics, surviving by 7 votes out of more than 200 MPs isn't surviving. It's a public execution in slow motion. It's a declaration that nearly half your own party has lost faith in your leadership. Within hours, the fallout began. 2 local party chairs in red wall constituencies resigned in protest, saying they could no longer defend the leadership to their members. A senior union leader, someone who had backed the current leader from the beginning, released a carefully worded statement urging leadership to listen carefully to the voice of working-class voters and remember who put us within reach of power. Reform UK held another press conference within the hour. Their leader called the Labour leader wounded, weakened and out of touch. They announced 10 more candidate selections in marginal seats. Betting markets immediately shortened odds on a Conservative victory at the next election. Private polling commissioned by nervous Labour MPs told the brutal truth. In key marginal seats, Labour's lead over Conservatives had collapsed from 12 points to just 2 points in 3 weeks. In traditional red wall heartlands, Reform UK was now polling at 18%, enough to win seats outright under first past the post. if Labour and the Conservatives split the remaining vote evenly. Political columnists who had spent months writing about Labour's iron discipline and Conservative chaos started filing very different stories. Labour at war with itself. Leaders' authority shattered. The party that threw away a landslide. Here's the impossible trap the party now faces. To win a majority, Labour needs two completely different voter groups. Brexit supporting working-class voters in northern towns who want nothing to do with Europe, and pro-EU urban progressives in cities who see Brexit as a historical mistake that must eventually be corrected. Every step toward one group alienates the other. Every policy designed to win back the Red Wall enrages the metropolitan base. Every signal to Remain voters sends Red Wall seats running toward Reform UK. And the brutal truth, potential successors face exactly the same problem. One shadow minister has strong union backing and Red Wall credibility but limited appeal to middle-class professionals. Another polls well with urban progressives, but struggles with working-class voters who see them as out of touch. A third has the charisma and fundraising network, but no clear answer on Europe. Nobody has a solution that holds both wings together. Meanwhile, the Conservatives are stabilising. Inflation is falling after 2 years of pain. Investment announcements are rolling out. Economic growth forecasts are ticking upward. The Prime Minister, written off as ineffective just 6 months ago, is suddenly looking competent. Their internal battles over leadership have quieted. They're unified, at least for now, in attacking Labour's disarray. And Reform UK. They're recruiting high-profile candidates, raising serious money, and building an actual ground operation. They're no longer a protest party. They're becoming a genuine electoral threat. The narrative has flipped completely. 6 months ago, every headline read Labour competence versus Conservative chaos. The assumption was that voters, exhausted by years of Tory infighting, would turn to Labour as the safe, stable alternative. Now? Labour divided, leader weakened, Red Wall slipping away. The tragedy, according to critics both inside and outside the party, is that none of this was inevitable. If Labour had simply stuck to its promise to move on from Brexit, to focus relentlessly on cost of living, healthcare and economic growth, they would likely be cruising toward victory. The Conservatives handed them every advantage. Economic pain, NHS waiting lists, scandal after scandal, but by trying to quietly reopen the door to Europe, by allowing internal discussions about future cooperation to leak, by giving even the appearance of backsliding on Brexit, Labour reignited wounds that had barely healed. They reminded Red Wall voters why they left in the first place, and they handed Reform UK the weapon they needed to split the vote. The lesson is harsh but undeniable. Brexit remains politically radioactive. Voters may privately regret how it turned out. They may complain about trade barriers, lost opportunities, and rising costs. But they will punish, swiftly and without mercy, any politician who appears to chip away at their decision. The referendum wasn't just a vote. It was a statement of identity, of pride, of democratic will. And any party that disrespects that pays the price. Right now, Labour looks like they're doing exactly that. This story is far from over. Party conference is just weeks away, and it promises to be brutal. Motions criticising leadership will be debated publicly. Rival factions will hold competing events. The media will feast on every angry exchange. Local elections are coming in the spring, and they'll be the first real test of whether the damage can be contained or whether it's terminal. Behind the scenes, MPS are already positioning themselves for a potential leadership race. Shadow cabinet members are taking calls from donors, testing support, building coalitions. If the local elections go badly, if another poll shows further collapse, the pressure for a leadership challenge will become irresistible. What happens next won't just decide the next election. It will determine the direction of Britain for a generation. Will Labour hold together and find a way to appeal to both wings of its coalition? Or will it fracture, lose the next election, and spend another decade in opposition? Will the Conservatives capitalise on Labour's chaos and secure another term? Or will Reform UK break through and fundamentally reshape British politics? If you want to know what happens before anyone else does, subscribe now, because the next chapter of this political earthquake is about to hit, and you don't want to miss it. Drop a comment below with your prediction. Does the leader survive until the next election, or is this the beginning of the end? Let's hear your thoughts.